Hello, and welcome to today's webinar about local action to help meet state and federal climate mitigation goals. There's a lot to unpack in that title. Thank you for joining us. My name's Mary Waldron, and I'm the Executive Director of the Old Colony Planning Council. For those not familiar with OCPC, as we're referred to, we are the regional planning agency for most of the Plymouth County and a few neighboring towns. We assist our 17 communities in planning for present and future needs, utilizing our local knowledge, technical experience, and regional collaboration. To learn more about OCPC, please visit our website at oldcolonyplanning.org. Before we begin today, I'd like to thank the Green Communities Division of Mass Department of Energy Resources for the grant that we received that made this webinar possible. Thank you. And I know that there are a few folks from that division that are on the webinar today. OCPC has been a partner of DOER for a few years now, helping municipalities in our region to become green communities and reduce their municipal energy use. Today, we are welcoming 4 speakers. First, we'll hear from Dan Nees, Director of Policy and Finance at Throwe Environmental, a consultancy specializing in assisting governments at all levels, as well as other organizations in finding effective and innovative solutions to environmental challenges. For the past 20 years, Dan has assisted communities across the country in their effort to finance environmental and sustainable development initiatives. His work currently focuses on developing an innovative market and performance-based financing systems to reduce the cost of climate change and environmental mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. He has a BA in economics, an MA in environmental policy, and an MBA, all from the University of Maryland, College Park. We'll also hear from Melissa Mittelman, Manager in Energy and Climate Mitigation Policy at the Mass Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. Melissa manages the development of the Commonwealth's 2050 Clean Energy and Climate Plan and is currently focused on shifting the state's decarbonization strategy from planning to implementation. Earlier in her career, Melissa worked in financial services and financial journalism with particular interest in sustainable finance. She holds a BA from Middlebury College and a dual MBA MS in Energy and Environment from Boston University. Our third speaker will be Joanne Bissetta, Director of the Green Communities Division at the Mass Development of Energy Resources. Joanne, a second Joanne at our meeting today. Joanne started at DOER in 2009 as a regional coordinator, working directly with municipal officials and volunteers on green communities designation and clean energy project, and was named director last year. She possesses over 2 decades of local and state government experience, having worked at Mass DEP, the town of Concord, and the city of Cambridge. Joanne earned an MS in Communications at Emerson College and an MA in Urban Environmental Policy at Tufts University. While not working, you can find her in the garden, on her bike, and tending to her backyard chickens. A beautiful day like today, this is where, right, we all want to be, except we've got some great other speakers. So our final speaker is Julie Curti, Director of Clean Energy at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, also known as MAPC, our sister organization. Julie leads MAPC's Clean Energy Department and supports MAPC communities working on climate mitigation and adaptation planning and implementation. She holds a master's in city planning with a certificate in environmental policy and planning from MIT and is a trained facilitator and certified mediator in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Well, before I get into the next step, I do want to also just recognize Joanne Zigman. Joanne is our senior planner and our sustainability planner. Joanne is, in herself has an expertise in so many areas, and we are so glad to have Joanne on our staff and involved in coordinating today's event. So we'll be taking questions as a panel at the end of the presentations. Please submit your questions through the chat or Q&A button at any time. Again, if you're thinking of a question, then you must know that others will be thinking of the same question too. So if you prefer to ask a question live, please click the raise hand button, and at the time comes, we will call on you. A recording of this webinar will be available in the next couple days, and you'll receive notification. So with that, please enjoy this great expertise that you'll be hearing from today. And I turn this over to you, Dan. Oh, and Dan, you're muted.
Well, thank you very much. Sorry about that. I appreciate the introduction. My job is to be as quick as possible and pave the way for the speakers that you're going to hear from in a minute. As you heard in my bio, I've worked for Throwe Environmental, and more importantly, for today, most of my career is spent working at the local level. So while you're going to hear from a number of people today at the state level, my job has been to improve the capacity and the resources at the local level. So that's the perspective that I'm going to bring to this. And I just want to apologize up front. I don't normally read notes when I give a presentation, but I'm under strict orders not to go over the 10 minutes. So I'm going to read to stay on track today. I think clearly this is an unprecedented time when it comes to infrastructure funding and financing, especially at the local and the state levels. The combination of the COVID recovery money, the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act, those three things has just been this incredible amount of resources that have been the result of which is a very significant, and I would argue overdue, down payment on improving our country's critical infrastructure systems, not the least of which is our energy systems that we're going to hear about mostly about today. These investments will have, and I should say are having, a very significant impact on local governments and communities across an array of infrastructure systems. Again, we're going to talk about energy systems today, but really it's been a myriad of systems and assets that have been benefited from these investments. In the bio, it said for the past 20 years, I've been working on these issues. I'm embarrassed to say that I've just kept that number where it is for some time now. So it's closer to 30 years at this point, working with local governments. And while the situation we're in right now is unprecedented, what makes for a successful local government initiative and program around environmental and infrastructure issues has stayed pretty consistent and pretty constant. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what some of those things are that make for successful community programs, specifically as it relates to trying to get these federal resources, often in the form of grants, and to use those resources most efficiently and most effectively. The first thing that successful communities have, and this is not just throwing a bone to Old Colony Planning Council, it is planning. And the most successful communities have a clear understanding and a plan of where they're trying to get to, not just with the infrastructure system at play. So again, in this particular case, we're talking about energy, but broadly speaking in their community, where they are trying to be. And they have a clear understanding where their weaknesses are and where their needs are. And fortunately, or actually, unfortunately, oftentimes federal money, especially, but state money does not include resources for planning. That is actually not the case with a lot of the federal money that we're seeing right now, especially in the IRA program, which is funding a lot of the energy projects. And there is money there for planning. And so we think this is a huge benefit to communities that are trying to improve their capacity, because again, it begins with good planning. The second thing that the most successful communities have is an ability to receive funding and get the funding where it needs to be. In other words, they have projects that have been identified and are ready to move. And we hear this, there's a term that we often use that's called shovel-ready projects, and I'm not sure how accurate that is, but really we're talking about projects that are somewhere between the point of an idea and implementation. And so you know what it is you're trying to do, you have some level of design, you've done something that you're ready, you've done enough things that you're ready to receive those monies and move those projects forward. I've heard it described one time that without those types of projects, the money is often like an airplane flying around your community with no place to land. You have to have clear understanding of the actual physical things that you're going to try to do and have the ability to get that money to those projects as quickly and as effectively as you can. The third thing that the most successful community have is that next step, which is the capacity to move capital. So we spend so much time in my industry, especially now with all of this, again, unprecedented amount of money, especially in the form of grants, getting communities ready to receive grants or getting them prepared and have the capacity to actually get a good grant proposal in the door. I'm not arguing how important that is, but unfortunately, writing a good grant proposal does not mean you have the capacity to implement that grant efficiently and effectively. And so the most effective communities not only are very good at writing grants, they're very good at understanding what is going to be necessary to move that money in a way that's efficient and effective. So again, the most effective communities understand both sides of that equation. So hopefully we are able to use this money that is flowing through our systems right now to prepare communities to have more capacity moving forward, not just to have the capacity to get the grant in the door. Fourth, the most effective communities understand this issue of interconnectedness. While renewable energy and energy financing systems might be the point of particular funding programs and what we're going to talk about today, effective communities recognize that those types of resources, even though they may be targeted, are part of a much broader community ecosystem, and an ecosystem of projects and programs and needs. And this is really important because even with all of this money, it's a blip on the radar as when it compares to the actual need that we have at the local level. One of the interesting things about the IRA specifically and the revenue, renewable energy financing that is resulting from that bill, is taking what has usually been in the past has been a infrastructure system that has been at the federal or the regional level, and the responsibility of institutions really pretty much outside the local level. That is changing with renewable energy and with disaggregated systems. And now local governments are essential for the states and the federal government to achieve their goals. And to do that, there's the locals understand this interconnectedness of where they need to be. So it's not just about getting renewable energy projects on the ground that will benefit state and federal climate mitigation policies and programs, but it's about getting those monies in the door to also enable more efficient and effective and resilient energy systems for the most in need, and for those parts of the community that have been disenfranchised or underserved. It's connecting renewable energy to other environmental, economic, cultural, and even historic resources. And so again, the most effective communities understand those interconnected nature of those things and are able to then bring these types of resources, again, though targeted, into a much broader planning system. So kind of full circle in the planning process. And then finally, the most effective communities understand the power of partnerships. This is especially important for smaller communities. Now, I've been referring several times now to most effective communities. That does not necessarily mean the biggest communities. Our firm has worked with communities as small as 5,000 people that have been some of the most innovative and advanced in their ability to use funding and to finance projects that would seem to be outside their capacity given their size. And we worked with some very large communities that even with all of the resources that they have, just can't quite seem to get their systems together in an efficient and effective way. But what all communities, regardless of size, the ones that are really good and they're really good at getting things on the ground, do it in partnership. So it's internal partnerships, and that could be among agencies, more specifically among government, and then the community leaders out that they serve and that they represent. Externally with other communities, that's especially important for regions like yours, and to be relying on planning institutions like Old Colony Planning Council and others. And then perhaps most importantly, especially as it relates to energy, is making connections at the state level. The states are going to be so important in getting these resources where they need to be and enabling local implementation. Fortunately, you live in a state that has a very progressive and aggressive state leadership in getting these projects and getting these monies in the door. So you're well served in that respect. So that's it from me. Hopefully that kind of laid the foundation for what is important for making these projects work and for getting these resources where you need them. I'm available to answer questions when that is appropriate, and I really do appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. We will now go to Melissa. Just give me 1 second, Melissa, and I shall share your slides.
Great, thank you so much. And just while you're pulling those up, which I appreciate, thank you, Dan, and thank you, Mary and Joanne, for hosting this today, and to the whole Old Colony Planning Council for the opportunity to share a bit about our work. I am not as skilled as Dan. I do have slides, but there's only 4, so I'll do my best to be brief. But as Mary explained earlier, my name is Melissa Mittelman. I'm the manager of energy and climate mitigation policies here at the state. In practice, that means I do a lot of work on our decarbonization strategy. So I will do my best today to give you a very brief overview of our state efforts and then put that into context for how that can equip you and work with you as partners at the municipal level. So happy to jump right in. I wanted to start by grounding us in some of the history here, just because I think it largely informs some of the context we're seeing today around our clean energy and climate planning. A lot of the work with regard to greenhouse gas mitigation planning started in 2008 with the establishment of the Global Warming Solutions Act. It really put Massachusetts on the map as one of the first states to statutorily require statewide greenhouse gas emissions limits. Not long after that, we published our first clean energy and climate plan for 2020, kicking off a decade which involved considerations around an integrated climate strategy, progress tracking and analytics development, and then ending that decade in 2020 with the formal establishment of the 2050 statewide greenhouse gas emissions limit at net zero. What that means in practice is that we are looking to achieve 85% or more greenhouse gas emissions reductions from the 1990 baseline level. The remaining percentage comes from sequestration from our natural working lands or engineered methodologies. That year, we also put out a roadmap looking at a number of different pathways to achieve that goal. 2021 was a huge turning point in terms of what I call the 2021 climate law, but the next generation roadmap, which amended the initial Global Warming Solutions Act requirements to include statewide emissions limits and then set sector specific limits. Last year, we had a busy year. We both published the 2025-2030 CECP and the 2050 CECP, mapping out a number of different strategies and plans and policies to achieve those numeric benchmarks. And then that brings us to today and modern day with the arrival of the Healey-Driscoll administration and the kind of clear prioritization of climate on the administration's agenda. So this is just a visual of some of those benchmarks mapped out over time. You'll see this maps out to 2050, and you'll see the emissions reduction along the y-axis here. The different colors denote the different sectors and the limits that we've set for each of them. You'll see significant reductions in transportation, electricity, and buildings over time. And the shape of this curve really speaks to the ambition that we have and the challenge that we have ahead of us. I think this administration really sees this work as both a huge challenge and a huge opportunity. So these numbers here in red denote those statutory requirements in terms of the emissions reductions economy-wide for 2025, 2030, and 2040 and 2050. You can see here at this 2050 level that underneath zero on the y-axis denotes the sequestration capacity of our natural and working lands. Again, that's a key part of our goal in achieving net zero. So for those of you who have put up with a number of different pages and some dense reading and read through the CECPs closely, you'll know that we have suites of policies across every sector and cross-cutting themes, but many of them really come back to these four pillars. End-use energy, we need to be electrifying our end uses so that we can shift away from consuming fossil fuels. So when it comes to transportation, for example, we're implementing vehicle standards from the California Air Resources Boards. We're looking carefully at our incentive programs for EV adoption. We're looking closely at our charging network and the capabilities we need to build out there. On buildings, we're looking very closely at our heat pumps and the ability to scale that technology across the state and the building stock. We're also looking at energy efficiency and flexibility, that second column here. How are we looking at managing our load, both through technologies and storage, but also through load management programs such as demand response. Also thinking about things like building codes to ensure that we are making our buildings as energy efficient as possible. Decarbonizing our energy supply, this third column here. None of the work around electrifying our end uses will work if our initial generation is not clean. So we're really thinking carefully about the build out of our offshore wind and solar capacity, which we see as key cornerstones of our state generation mix. We're also looking at how to build out the grid and transmission infrastructure to make sure that that energy is getting across the transmission infrastructure to where it needs to be. And then lastly, this carbon sequestration component, kind of what I talked about a minute ago with the net zero goal, we will rely on our natural working lands or potentially engineered sources to sequester remaining carbon that we are not able to reduce. Next slide. So I've done my best to kind of put this into language that I think might be more useful for you. And I think that, you know, all of our goals will not be achieved without close partnership and close relationships with municipalities. And I think we're all aware here that municipal planning decisions really are also climate decisions. These blue boxes are just some of the different levers we could think through. First being municipal aggregation creates more electricity procurement options for residents, including the procurement of cleaner energy. Zoning affects where people live, where they work, and the emissions associated with getting between the two. Building codes, which will really determine the readiness of our built environment to incorporate electrification, promote energy efficiency, and improve the overall performance of our building stock. This past year, our Department of Energy Resources did update the stretch energy code and developed a municipal opt-in specialized stretch energy code, say that 5 times fast, but which kind of furthers our net zero readiness. I would note here that we are also pursuing federal funding opportunities to help municipalities implement these codes. So please stay tuned on those efforts. Fleet contracts, another huge area. This is really thinking through how vehicles that municipalities own or contract with can advance electrification efforts. One side note here is that the 2022 climate law did establish an electric vehicle infrastructure coordinating council, which will have a role for a regional planning agency. So the voice of municipalities in thinking through where the different charging infrastructure needs are will be essential. And then lastly here, the solid waste programs. These affect the quantity and the emissions intensity of waste streams. So as municipalities think through where to manage or how and where to manage their waste streams, that can certainly affect the emissions that come from landfills and other sources. So there are a ton of different programs for municipalities, including green communities, which Joanne will speak to at length in just a minute here, municipal vulnerability preparedness. I think many of you are quite familiar with this program. I will note here that the team is looking to launch a 2.0 version, supporting communities revisiting their resilience priorities developed in kind of the planning grant process and really shifting over to the implementation side. And the application for pilot communities is expected to launch in the next couple of weeks and close in mid to late May. So please do take a look at that website and those resources. That's a team that's very eager to kind of take this program to the next level. And then also our sustainable materials recovery program supports municipalities in their local recycling efforts, program development, enforcement activities, and can also be a great resource for you. There are roughly 80 more grant programs, mostly all available to municipalities. I did put the link here because I didn't want to bore you by going through every single one, but I do encourage you to take a look as there's much that we offer as we kind of look to partner on many of these different mitigation goals. So with that, I will wrap and happy to take questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Joanne, if you're ready.
There we go. Can you see my slides?
Yes. Are you able to blow them up for us?
Yes, hang on a second.
Mhm.
Too many things open here. Okay, let's close that. How about now?
Yes, perfect.
All right. First of all, thank you all for inviting me to participate in this action-packed and informative program. I'm happy to share some information from the Green Communities Division and participate in the Q&A afterwards.
Could I, Joanne, just let you know, I think we're seeing your presenter version with your notes actually on the screen here. So you just might want to swap screens.
Thank you. Hang on. How about now?
That's good.
Okay, I apologize for that. Again, too many screens in the office, so I apologize. All right. Many of you are familiar with the Green Communities Program, and this is just the slide that reiterates that we're not just about the designated green communities, but we're here as a resource for all municipalities in Massachusetts. Okay. Now my slides are not advancing. There we go. Here's some, slides that folks, particularly in the South Coast, are familiar with. We're here with a, climate emergency. We're seeing extremes in weather. Just the past couple of summers, we've had one summer in 2020 of extreme drought. And then the following summer, we've had extreme rain. We've had lots of flooding, extreme storms, mayhem, but this is what we aspire to in 2050. As Melissa described earlier, there's a plethora of policies and programs and laws that are in place now to put us on the pathway to having a net zero future in 2050 regarding the energy infrastructure, the grid, and going way down to the households and energy use. And again, these are the 4 pillars that she talked about by decarbonizing buildings and vehicles, cleaning up the grid, and carbon sequestration through our natural and working lands. So this is always a fun chart I like to show. As Melissa described earlier, we are cleaning up the grid as we deploy more solar and offshore and onshore wind. And just to look at how the estimated emissions related to electric generation is changing from 2020 to 2050, it's going to be cut almost 2/3, going from about 680 pounds per megawatt hour to about 200 pounds per megawatt hour. So a lot of people, will say to us, hey, we get it, EVs and heat pumps, but doesn't electricity also generate greenhouse gas emissions? And the answer is yes, but as we go further along in time, it's going to reduce. And here's another way of looking at it in terms of heating technologies. Right now, heating with the heat pump emits 45% less greenhouse gas emissions than natural gas. And then you push it to 2050, it's 85% less. As Melissa mentioned, first things we want to look at, any new buildings that we build, we want to make them as efficient as possible. She mentioned the new stretch code and the specialized opt-in municipal stretch code. We have to get a better acronym for that, but right now we're calling it the specialized code. And that's really pushing new construction to be zero energy, zero emission as much as possible. And the good news is that this isn't a pie in the sky concept. It's being implemented now. There's been a ton of studies and guidelines and so forth. And we're starting to see some of this now with new municipal buildings and school buildings being built as we go. However, we do have existing buildings. And in terms of some resources for public facility owners and public building owners, like many of you on this webinar, the Mass Save incentives. These are the projects that are supported by that surcharge on our electric bills, have been greatly enhanced with the implementation of the new 3-year plan. In particularly, weatherization incentives have been greatly upgraded. They keep pushing the efficiency upgrades for building systems. And now they're really starting to beef up their technical support and financial support for fuel conversions. So if you have a facility that's heated by oil or natural gas and you want to see if it's feasible to convert to a heat pump or what that would look like, they provide some assistance for those types of studies, as well as being a partner in new construction. They have a very robust new construction team that will work with you to develop a net zero building or close to net zero building. And provide robust incentives and tools to help you get there. In addition, DOER, our team has grants through the Green Communities Division. The Green Community Grants, which I'll talk about in a bit, but in terms of planning, that's something that Dan mentioned earlier. The Municipal Energy Technical Assistance Grants are short money to help further a clean energy project. So if a community needs some engineering expertise for specifications or designing a new heating system or so forth, these grants are eligible or available for municipalities to use. Then again, you don't have to be a green community. These are open to anybody. And then the last bullet here, MBLC, is the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners. This is sort of that stealth agency that helps fund library construction projects and renovations. And they have been a huge component of incorporating clean energy components in new construction or renovations. So if you have a library project pending, I would definitely work with them. And the Green Community Grants, which are our bread and butter, if you will. We have designation grants that are formula-based. And then after that, communities can apply for competitive grants, which are currently capped at $200,000. And we added a new category in recent years for building decarbonization, recognizing that this is a non-trivial project that can take longer. So we upfronted funding for these that can extend over a longer period of time. We currently have a competitive grant solicitation or PON, Program Opportunity Notice, out. So please, if you're not aware of it, reach out to your regional coordinator and get some more information about that. And then lastly, if you're not ready to apply for a grant or not sure what projects to do, there's this great checklist developed by our friends over at UMass Clean Energy Extension that facility managers or building managers can use walking around your building just to assess the current state of affairs and identify some potential problems that can be, easy to fix, low or no cost tweaks to things. And there's the website there from the UMass Clean Energy Extension. A little bit about fleets. Green Community Grants fund EVs, but also the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, Mass DEP, has their EVIP program, which is open, sort of a rolling admission. So if you're not ready to apply for a Green Community Grant, definitely look at the EVIP program, and they fund battery electric, plug-in hybrids, and zero emission motorcycles. I want to see some more of those on the streets. In addition, they also support charging stations as well for a variety of deployments, workplace charging, multifamily unit dwelling, and public access charging. And this is relatively new. So the More EV program has the More EV truck program now. And unlike the More EV program, the More EV trucks are available to public fleets. So this is available right now on the More EV website, and it provides incentives and rebates for medium heavy duty vehicles. And the bigger the vehicle, the more the incentive. So I want to encourage communities to look at that as they look to expand their truck or replace their trucks. And then lastly, regarding vehicles, electric school buses are the hot new thing. EPA rolled out a grant last year, and I believe Massachusetts, I forget, a couple of dozen of school districts in Massachusetts are receiving electric school bus grants, and the EPA will be issuing more applications in the next few years. Our friends at the Mass CEC, Clean Energy Center, I'm sorry, too many acronyms, are providing technical assistance as well as additional funding to help school districts and communities figure out how to incorporate electric school buses into their fleets. ACT, Accelerating Clean Transportation, or ACT, They have ACT school bus advisory services, as well as additional funding for deployment. And I believe they're accepting more communities for the advisory services on a rolling basis, or they'll open up the applications soon. So if this is something your school district or community is interested in pursuing, contact the Mass Clean Energy Center. The good news is that there's various models available. It's not just one type of school bus. They're cheaper to maintain and easier to fuel than a diesel bus, less polluting. So that's something communities can look towards. And then planning, again, something that Dan had mentioned. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the Regional Energy Planning Assistance Grants, which is helping to fund this webinar, as well as other types of capacity building and clean energy projects throughout the state. This is funding we provide to the regional planning agencies to really expand the clean energy expertise at the local level. In particular, we're excited about providing not just program assistance for green communities, but also helping communities go to that next level by helping with net zero planning, helping with any types of clean energy project support that communities and especially regions may be interested in doing. And sorry, Julie, I borrowed this. I love this visual. In terms of looking at different ways in which communities can engage with clean energy planning. Choose your own adventure. It's overwhelming to think about everything you need to do, but figure out what your community's priorities are, what the funding sources are, and then start looking at how to implement it for the future. And coming soon, this is our Green Communities 2.0. Some of you may have heard of this Climate Leader program. We conducted a request for information last year. We hope to launch this later this year, and essentially it's to align our resources and tools that we provide in the Green Communities Division to match the clean energy and climate goals that Melissa articulated. Right now, our grants are really focused on energy efficiency, and we really want to grow that to advance it to greenhouse gas reductions. We want to provide a framework for communities to do more, and then one important thing about this is to enhance community engagement. The types of local actions are community aggregation that Melissa mentioned, the green community aggregation, running clean community campaigns like a Heat Smart or Cool Smart in some cases, and working with residents. And so we've got our work cut out for us. We're looking to hear from you on what your needs are. And here's my contact information. And there's Lisa Sullivan, who's the Southeast Regional Coordinator. Feel free to reach out to any of us to answer any of your questions. And with that, I'll pass it on.
Thank you, Joanne. Over to you, Julie.
Great. Hi, everybody. Give me one quick moment here. Get this started. Okay, can folks see my slides?
Yes, thank you.
All right, great. So hello, my name is Julie Curti. I'm the Director of Clean Energy Planning at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. So we are a sister planning agency to OCPC to your north. So we're the largest of the regional planning agencies, and we serve 101 municipalities in the greater Boston region, providing technical assistance and capacity building to municipalities in different planning areas. Specifically, I direct our clean energy team that focuses on clean energy and climate planning, technical assistance, and implementation in different municipalities. So what I want to talk to you about mostly today is some tools that we've developed that Joanne previewed a little bit for local net zero and climate action planning. So Melissa covered this earlier, but wanted to just remind folks that when planning at the local level, it's very helpful to align with the state context. So again, as she shared in March 2021, the Commonwealth updated its greenhouse gas reduction goals. So we are aiming for a 50% reduction by 2030 and net zero by 2050. And the Clean Energy and Climate Plan has a lot of helpful information that municipalities can use as they develop their local climate action plans. We have worked with municipalities that want to be more ambitious in the state context, which we recognize and try to support. I will say that's difficult at the local level, and that involves having strategies in your plan that relate to advocacy, trying to get the state and federal government to move even faster towards meeting our climate action goals. So the main tool that we have available for municipalities, so for any planners on this call or volunteers on energy or sustainability committees, I wanted to just highlight our municipal net zero playbook that we developed a few years ago. It has a few different modules you can download from our website, and the URL is on the slide here and will be mailed out after. We have a framework for action that outlines different steps to plan. We have a framework for equity I'll talk about in a little bit more in a moment. And then there's 4 chapters in the playbook. One focuses on zero emissions mobility, a net zero buildings chapter, climate smart zoning and permitting, and clean energy supply. And what we did to create those chapters is extensive research, kind of looking across the country at what type of local climate action planning was happening and what was most impactful in terms of strategy development and program development and policy development at the local scale. And we tried to take all of that information and condense it down into about 10 actions per chapter that we think are the most impactful for local governments to take in their climate action plans. So you can kind of consider this a menu of options that you can take as a municipality to get going on your local climate action plan. And we tried to develop this playbook recognizing that municipalities come in all different sizes, they have all different types of capacity. Some have local staff who can lead this work, and some do not. So the idea of the playbook is that a local planner could take and use this working with community members, or a volunteer committee, perhaps working with their municipality, could also use the playbook to develop a climate action plan. And climate action plans can come on a whole range of spectrums. There can be the really in-depth and complex plans that some municipalities choose to develop if they have those resources. But we encourage municipalities to think more on this part of the spectrum, thinking about, if I have limited capacity, what are the 10 things, taking from the playbook and other resources, that my municipality can take and do? How do I engage my community and get going on those actions versus spending a lot of time on planning and evaluation? So what is net zero? So at the community scale, it means kind of balancing out emissions. So at the community-wide scale, ensuring that goals, strategies, and processes enable net zero emissions. And net zero emissions is a balance. So to the greatest degree possible, reducing greenhouse gas emissions from our energy, building, and transportation systems, and then balancing out any remaining emissions through greenhouse gas removal, ideally through natural resources. So trying to achieve the balance you see on the bottom of the slide here. I also want to talk a little bit about equity as part of this work. At MAPC and in our sister planning agencies, we strongly encourage municipalities to prioritize equity in the work that they're doing. MAPC defines equity as a practice that takes into consideration the history, policies, and power structure and culture of a community, and then aims to respond to those dynamics and ensures that tools and resources, policies and programs and plans that we develop are tailored to different populations' needs. So in terms of what that looks like in practice, when we do climate action planning, we try to do an equity assessment for each strategy. So we want to ask who's been historically impacted by what we're looking at, the different systems, and who will be most impacted by the future changes to the climate that we expect to see. We want to think about community engagement and how we meaningfully engage impacted communities and share decision-making in planning processes. So not just getting the usual suspects in the room, but ensuring that the whole spectrum of the community is represented and that those populations that have historically been impacted by climate and less represented have a voice and say in the process. And then we encourage an equity analysis of each strategy. So if you're creating a strategy or a policy or program, asking how will this strategy benefit populations that have historically been harmed by past actions? And if there are harms from that strategy, who will those impact, and ensuring we don't cause future harm to populations? So when we think about impacted populations, one tool to point out is the Massachusetts Environmental Justice Viewer. The URL is on the bottom of the slide here. From the recent climate bill, the state redefined environmental justice based on a variety of criteria, so related to household income, racial composition, and percentage of the population that's English speaking in a community. So you can go and see for Old Colony Planning Council some of the environmental justice designated communities in your region. And those could be some of the populations to focus on with engagement and ensuring that strategies are equitable that you develop. That said, even if your community doesn't show up on this map, or specific parts of your community don't, we still know there are impacted populations living everywhere. So that's why a good stakeholder assessment as part of your climate action planning process is really important. So a few other tools just to point out really quickly that we have available. So we developed a greenhouse gas inventory tool in 2020 that's pretty easy to use. So volunteers can lead this process or municipal staff, and it allows you to develop a baseline greenhouse gas inventory for your municipality. We encourage this as an early step, so you kind of know your baseline. Where are we at with our emissions? What are the biggest sectors we want to tackle? And that can help be a guidepost. We're hoping to get funding soon to update this tool more, and also some updated data from the state on their vehicle census, so we can bring in more recent data on electric vehicle adoption. And then we'll be able to update this tool, and it can be used as a tracker over time to help communities assess their progress on their greenhouse gas reduction goals. So I wanted to point this out, and on our website, there's a really nice step-by-step guide to using the tool and also a recorded webinar that walks you through the tool. I'm not sure if this is a plan for the future, but with past Green Communities funding from Joanne's team, regional planning agencies like OCPC could also provide technical assistance to communities to develop a greenhouse gas inventory. And then just a little peek at the playbook. So like I said, there's 4 thematic chapters. So this is a look at the clean energy supply chapter. So again, we tried to take and prioritize some of the most impactful actions a community can take. So one example, implementing a municipal green aggregation program is in here, and that's actually the most impactful thing a local government can do on the energy supply side to reduce greenhouse gas emissions is procure a competitive energy supply and add a greater and greater portion of renewable energy to that supply than the utility otherwise would. And within the chapter, there's a several-page layout for each strategy, walking through what the key steps are to deploy that strategy, equity considerations, and immediate next steps you might want to take. I think we're almost out of time, so I'll probably skip these next few slides, but in the deck that will go out, I did highlight an example from working with the town of Acton recently on their climate action plan and what some of the strategies and steps in the process looked like that we took with Acton. So I'd point you towards the town of Acton's website if you'd like to see their climate action plan as kind of an example of a plan at this end of the spectrum, a really detailed and in-depth plan. But again, there's a whole range you could pursue as a community, and this is just one example I'd point towards. And things to highlight about that process in particular were the community engagement we took. So if you're going to do climate action planning, would encourage you as much as possible to think about how can we bring people into this issue? How can we make it resonate with them? How can we meet people where they are? So for this plan, we did student workshops, we did focus groups with renters, we did walking and talking tours at the local park, a community celebration. So a whole bunch of different ways to bring people into the climate action plan that help to build will now for the implementation phase that Acton is in. The last thing I'll note, and I believe OCPC is working on this too, but we did just set up a new federal funding webpage. As our first presenter shared, there's a lot of federal funding coming from the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure and Jobs Act. So feel free to check this out. We have information on the Energy Efficiency Conservation Block Grant here and several other programs that are coming. And your colleagues at Old Colony Planning Council also can provide technical assistance and support to municipalities on federal funding as it comes. So I will stop there. Thanks so much. Here's my contact information, and we look forward to the panel discussion.
Super. Thank you very much, Julie. So if folks have any questions at this time, you can either pop them into the Q&A or the chat that you see on your screens. You can also click the raise hand button, and I can call on you if you'd like to ask live. There are a couple of questions in the Q&A right now, so I'm just going to go through these. The first question is from West Hampton. So West Hampton as a municipality shows 40% of its energy use through vehicles. Other than 2-vehicle police cruisers that are hybrids, the town runs fire and highway trucks and tractors. So the assumption here that is made is that net zero would mean that the town would have to offset annual fuel usage through carbon sinks and or greater than used electric generation. So the question also is, will green communities grant funding be available for funding partial or complete solar on municipal buildings or over municipal parking lots? So I think it's two parts here. So the first part is about net zero locally. So if a community does all it can to reduce its energy use and it can't really do much more, how can they try and offset that additional use, or should they? And then the second question is about funding of solar on municipal buildings and lots. So who would like to take those? Joanne, would you like to start?
I'll start the second question first. So historically, green community grants have not been supporting rooftop solar because there's a lot of other incentives and programs available for that funding. So we're trying to target our funds to augment or fill gaps where it's not needed. And also up until very recently, thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act, municipalities weren't able to take advantage of the tax incentives and so forth that are available to private industry. But now that's changed because the Inflation Reduction Act now allows for, I forget the proper term, but it's essentially getting the tax credit monetized through those without a tax liability, like nonprofits and municipalities. So we may reconsider that sort of in the future for green community grants, but certainly right now we're not supporting solar projects. There are other ways to go about funding municipal solar, but I think as we look towards other funding mechanisms and the federal funds that are coming down, we may take a look at reconsidering that or having another opportunity. Related to net zero at the local level, I'll see if Julie wants to respond, but I think in terms of where we are with, at least through the Green Communities Division, we're looking to help communities decarbonize their fleets and buildings as much as possible. So acknowledging that each I don't think, and I'll let others respond, I don't think we're going to direct municipalities to each be its own little net zero fiefdom, if you will. I think what we're looking to do is have existing facilities be decarbonized as much as possible, and then supporting increased, as you mentioned, generation, and with new buildings, having them be electrified as much as possible. But I'll let the planners on the screen opine if there's other ways to think about that.
I just jump in to echo and support. I think we believe the best strategy is to reduce and remove carbon emissions as much as possible. And with vehicles, we have those technologies right on their way with battery electric vehicles and our move towards a clean electric grid. So would strongly encourage those actions. And then I think one thing that we'll be exploring with some of the federal funding that we're getting is a regional carbon offset fund in the future, and the potential to possibly reduce emissions through some local mechanisms like that can't be reduced directly on site. But buying emissions and offsets further afield from our local region is generally not a strategy we encourage communities to focus on in the present day, as much as taking as much local action as you can with your resources. I don't know, Melissa or Dan, if you want to add anything.
No, we have another question that's more specific, and Joanne, I think I'm going to put this back at you as well. Are there EV options for replacement of large trucks used for plowing and sanding of town roads? So the person asking the question is specifically thinking about Class 7 or 8 plow trucks made by Mack, White's, or Peterbilt.
That's a great question. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure it's quite there yet, but I do know that there are technologies related for heavy duty trucks or medium duty trucks that will be electrified. I know it exists, but I'm not sure the market availability of these. The good news is it keeps evolving over time. So if you go to that More EV Trucks website, they'll have a list of available trucks and technologies, and see if any of those vehicles that are there now are applicable to perform the way you want. And if not, in 5 years, maybe. But if others have more, I know just this much about vehicle technology, so if somebody else knows more, please pipe up.
I want to jump in here and ask a question myself too. One of the things that we often hear from our municipalities who are trying to reduce municipal energy use and decarbonize is that they're generally across the board understaffed and under-resourced. And often staff change in a lot of these communities as well on, pretty regular basis. So if somebody's new to this area and really trying to kind of develop from a foundation that may not be particularly well developed, what is the best place to go first to look for kind of information about what they should do and or where they can start with some kind of baby grants?
That's a great question. So depending on what their role, I would have them reach out to their Green Communities Regional Coordinator at first, just to get a brain dump on the variety of tools and resources that are out there. I'd also connect with, if they're a part of the investor-owned utility, National Grid or Cape Light Compact or Eversource or Unitil, reach out to the municipal utility representative that can provide an overview of what's already been done in the community. I'm suspecting there may not be breadcrumbs left by the previous facilities manager or town planner. So if you're able to get a sense of what's been going on in the built environment in your communities, what equipment is aging out or what's new, that'll be helpful as well. That's sort of a quick thing.
Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
The question is where to go just to get started, right?
Yeah, where's kind of a starting point for all of this?
Yes, I'd re-highlight the Net Zero Playbook I mentioned earlier. It's meant to be an introductory resource for community members. I can actually, I don't think I can, but maybe our OCPC folks can share the link somewhere for everyone to access it. But that's meant to be a starting resource about what net zero planning is, so the mitigation side of climate action planning. I know this is out of your general space, Melissa, but there might be some similar adaptation resources from the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program that the state has, if you want to take some first steps in that space as well.
There is a question in the chat about an EPA program. I'm not sure anybody has the answer to this. The question is, who is the lead for the state on the upcoming EPA climate pollution reduction grants? And how can municipalities participate in phase 1 planning activity? So I saw the greater Boston area as a statistical area designated as eligible. So I guess the question relates also, is it a municipality that leads? Is it an RPA? Is it somebody from the state? Does anybody know?
Yeah, I can jump in. So the EPA Climate Pollution Reduction Act funding provides $1 million to each of the largest metropolitan statistical areas, 67 in the country. So the Boston Metropolitan Statistical Area is one of those regions. It includes 188 cities and towns. Actually, it's quite large. It goes from southern New Hampshire all the way down to nearly the Cape. So MAPC is most likely going to lead that application for our MSA, working really closely with all of the other regional planning agencies in our region to come up with a way to develop that regional climate action plan in a way that engages as many of our municipalities as we can. And our goal and requirement for that work is to create a regional climate action plan in the next year that ensures that all of our communities qualify for the $4.6 billion in competitive funding that will begin to come out from EPA in early 2024 for actual implementation of the strategies in those plans and the state's sister plans. And Melissa can share more, but the state at the same time is eligible for $3 million in funding to continue their climate action planning work. So I'll let her share more about what that looks like.
Yeah, happy to build on that. So our Office of Climate Innovation and Resilience, which is one of the government level or governor's office level teams established by the executive order that Maura Healey issued on our first day on the job, is really leading a lot of our efforts with regard to federal funding, including the rollout of this climate pollution reduction grant, the planning phase. So we're actually working right now on our work plan, which is due at the end of this month. Part of it will involve specific and mapped out strategic engagement with municipalities and other planning agencies to ensure that we are aligning both the kind of $1 million planning efforts, as Julie mentioned, awarded to the Boston and Worcester areas, but then also just making sure that all communities have a voice in kind of how we're taking our CECP planning efforts toward that implementation side, which is what we largely kind of see the planning funding for Massachusetts as a whole really being focused on, because we have a little bit of a head start, given that we have, as a state, developed these clean energy and climate plans. We're now really thinking through what does it take and how do we further those analyses to make sure that we are aligning them with the federal funding opportunities available today? What are the areas that are ready to really go, and how do we kind of match the need and the availability of federal funding to make sure that we're rolling this out now in a timely manner? And so again, just the stakeholder engagement process does have a dedicated kind of area of focus with regard to municipal engagement. And so that's something that we'll be working closely with Julie and Mary and other partners on some of that planning work. So that's how I'd tackle that.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, it is 1:03. We've went a smidge over, but I think those were really good questions and answers. I want to thank the speakers once again, Julie, Joanne, Dan, as well as Melissa, for joining us for this webinar today. This is part of a series, so keep an eye out for OCPC's newsletter that will advertise upcoming webinars related to the Green Communities program. We will be sharing this recording with all registrants and participants. We'll include some links in there to MAPC's playbook, as well as contact details for our speakers. And of course, if at any time anybody has any questions related to climate change and energy, we always encourage you to reach out to Old Colony Planning Council here in our region, or to any of our sister planning agencies around the state. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.